Shadow's claws echoed as they dug into the frozen ground, piercing the deep silence of the Montana forest. The dog stopped, raised its head, and looked at Elijah Brooks. There was something in that look. A warning, a call, perhaps the beginning of a reckoning. Elijah dropped the axe in his hand and approached. Where Shadow had dug, a rusted piece of metal grinned from the earth. A badge, but this was no ordinary badge. The bloodstains on it were about to unlock a secret buried for 40 years. Have you ever found something that made you realize in that moment it would change your whole life? Elijah Brooks was a 47-year-old man, but sometimes he felt like he was 70. War stole years from a person's soul. When he returned from Afghanistan, he was a man filled with a sense of alienation that found no echo in his homeland. People around him thanked him, patted him on the shoulder, but no one really asked what he had been through. No one knew that he woke up drenched in sweat at night, the sound of bombs ringing in his ears. He had settled in a small cabin deep in the forests of Montana, 15 miles from town. The cabin, inherited from his grandfather, was now Elijah's refuge. It was a place far from the noise of the world, where he could hear only the whisper of pine trees and the cry of ravens. And there was Shadow. Shadow was a German shepherd with black-gray fur and clear amber eyes. Elijah had found him 3 years ago outside the town, half dead. He had been shot and abandoned. Elijah had brought him home, bandaged his wound, fed him, and waited. When Shadow recovered, he didn't leave. There was an indescribable bond between them. They had come from different sides of the war, but they spoke the same language, the language of survival. That morning, Elijah was chopping wood. Winter was approaching and he needed to stock up for his stove. Shadow was by his side as always, but this time it was different. The dog suddenly became restless. He lifted his nose in the air, his ears pricked up. Then he started running into the depths of the forest. Shadow. "Stop!" Elijah shouted. But the dog didn't stop. Elijah sighed, dropped his axe, and ran after Shadow. The dog was moving quickly through the pine trees. Elijah's chest was burning, but he didn't stop. He kept going after him. A few minutes later, Shadow stopped somewhere. He began digging at the ground with his paws. "What did you find, boy?" Elijah asked, breathless. He approached. Where Shadow had dug, among the leaves and rotten branches, was an old piece of metal. Elijah bent down and pulled it out. His hands were shaking. It was a rusted badge, star-shaped, with indistinct writing in the center. Elijah tried to clean it with his jacket pocket. The writing became clearer. Deputy J. Morrison, Whitefish County Sheriff's Department, 1987. Elijah felt his heartbeat quicken. 1987, 38 years ago. Whitefish County, this was it. But Deputy J. Morrison, he had never heard that name. Shadow stood beside the badge, letting out a deep growl. A dog's instincts were never wrong. Something was here, and Elijah knew it wasn't good. Going into town was always torture for Elijah. The stares, the fake smiles, the "how's it going, soldier" comments, it all felt suffocating. But today he had to go. He needed information about this badge. Whitefish was a typical small town in Montana. Its main street had a grocery store, a cafe, a barber shop, and a sheriff's office. Everyone knew each other, or at least they thought they did. Elijah parked his truck in front of the sheriff's office. Shadow sat in the back seat, his eyes watching Elijah intently. "Stay here, son. I'll be right back," Elijah said and got out of the car. When he opened the door to the sheriff's office, the familiar smell hit his nose. Coffee, old paper, and a faint smell of cigarettes. The young clerk sitting at the reception desk looked up. "Yes, how can I help you?" "I need to see Sheriff Hayes," Elijah said, his voice a little hoarse. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent." The clerk looked suspicious but let him in. A few minutes later, Sheriff Clayton Hayes appeared. Sheriff Hayes was a man in his 60s, broad-shouldered, with gray hair. He was a legend in town. He had been on the job for 40 years. Everyone respected him, but Elijah hadn't liked him since the day they first met. When the man looked at Elijah, there was a cold expression in his eyes, as if Elijah shouldn't be there. "Brooks," Hayes said, his voice lacking warmth or interest. "What do you want?" Elijah took the badge out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this, in the woods." Shadow dug it up. Hayes looked at the badge. For a moment, something changed on his face. A tension, a fear, but he quickly composed himself. "It's just an old badge. Lost equipment." "Why did you bring it to me?" "It says 1987 on it. Deputy J. Morrison." Did someone by that name work here? Hayes's jaw tightened. I don't know. 40 years ago. Who remembers? You remember? Elijah said, his voice hard. You were already here in 1987. You were a young officer. Hayes shot Elijah a hard look. Brooks, are you interrogating me? It does no one any good to stir up the past. Let me take this badge. Let's get it on record. You mind your own business? Elijah swallowed his anger. He knew he wouldn't get an answer here. He turned and headed for the door to leave. But Hayes's voice followed him. Brooks, a word of advice. Some things are better left buried. Understand? Elijah paused. He didn't turn around. He just opened the door and walked out. When he got back to his car, Shadow was restless. The dog growled toward the sheriff's office. It doesn't sit right with me either, buddy, Elijah said, patting Shadow's head. But don't worry. We won't let this go. Elijah went to the town library. It was an old, small building, but it held all the town's historical records. The librarian, Mrs. Martha, was a kind woman in her 70s. She smiled when she saw Elijah. Elijah, how nice to see you. What are you looking for today? Hello, Mrs. Martha. Can I see the local newspaper archives from 1987? A curious look appeared on Martha's face. 1987, that's going back a long way. But of course, the microfiches are in the archive room. I'll show you. The archive room was a dusty, cramped place. The old microfiches were stored in metal cabinets. Martha pulled out the box for 1987. Here you go. Call me if you need anything, she said, and left. Elijah began scanning the microfiches. January 1987, February 1987, March, April, May. Each page was filled with the town's ordinary events. Agricultural fairs, weddings, minor accidents. When he reached June 1987, a headline caught his eye. Morrison family missing, local community concerned. Elijah felt his heartbeat quicken. He began reading the article. The Morrison family, one of Whitefish County's respected families, disappeared last week. James Morrison, 42, his wife Linda Morrison, 39, and their 2 children, Sarah, 12, and Marcus, 8, were last seen at their home 10 days ago but have since vanished without a trace. Neighbors report that the front door was open, but no one was inside. The deputy sheriff suggests the family may have left voluntarily. However, the fact that they left their home and all their belongings behind is raising suspicions. Elijah took a deep breath. The Morrison family. Deputy J. Morrison. This couldn't be a coincidence. He looked at the next weekly newspaper. Morrison family wanted. Investigation continues. The case of the missing Morrison family continues to cause great concern in the town. Sheriff Clayton Hayes announced that the investigation is ongoing and that they are evaluating all possibilities. The fact that the family left without withdrawing all their money from the bank and left their car keys at home is raising suspicions among the authorities. Elijah flipped through the other pages. But a month later, there was no news. 2 months later, still nothing. The Morrison family vanished from the newspapers as if they had never existed. Shadow was waiting for Elijah outside the library. When Elijah came out, the dog stood up, ears perked. Elijah's mind was filled with questions. What happened to the Morrison family? And was there a connection to Deputy J. Morrison? That night in his cabin, Elijah sat in front of the badge. Shadow lay at his feet watching him. As Elijah turned the badge over in his hands, he noticed a detail. On the back of the badge, there was a small, faint scratch, written in handwriting, J.M. I died for the truth. Elijah's hair stood on end. J.M. James Morrison. Or someone else? One thing was certain. This badge wasn't just lost equipment. It was a message. And Shadow had led Elijah there to find it. But why? And why was Sheriff Hayes so defensive? Elijah went to his bedroom. But sleep didn't come that night. His mind was racing with questions. By morning, he had made up his mind. He wouldn't let this go. Shadow had given him a clue, and Elijah would follow that clue to the end. The next day, Elijah returned to town. This time, his target was different. The town's oldest resident, Mr. Harold Thompson, was 85 years old and a retired postman. He knew everyone's secrets, because letters always carried secrets. Thompson lived in a small house on the edge of town. When Elijah knocked on the door, the old man opened it. Behind his glasses were sharp, intelligent eyes. Elijah Brooks, right? Grandpa David's grandson. Come in, son. They went inside. The house was filled with old photographs and mementos. Thompson offered Elijah some tea. "What brings you here?" Thompson asked. Elijah took out the badge and placed it on the table. "I found this. It's from 1987. Do you know anything about the Morrison family?" Thompson's face darkened. He set down his tea and took a deep breath. "The Morrison family," he said, his voice trembling. "Do you really want to know, son? Because some truths are heavy." "I want to know," Elijah said, determined. Thompson looked out the window. It was as if he could see the ghosts of the past. The Morrison family was black. They came here in the early 1980s. James Morrison had moved from New York. He was a very hard-working man. He started working at the lumber mill. His wife, Linda, was a teacher. They had 2 beautiful children. Everyone in town loved them. Thompson paused, closed his eyes. But in 1987 something happened. James Morrison discovered a valuable mineral deposit beneath the land where he worked at the factory. Copper and silver. Very valuable. The land was theoretically leased by James's family, but the factory owner wanted to buy the land. James refused the deal. He said he had legal rights to the land. And then, Elijah asked, holding his breath, then the family disappeared, one night without a trace. The police said they might have left voluntarily. But no one believed it, because everything was in their house. There was even food on the table. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. And the investigation? Thompson looked at him with a bitter smile. The investigation? Clayton Hayes was a young deputy back then, ambitious, ruthless. 2 weeks later, the case was closed. No evidence, they said. The family was never found. And that land? It was sold to the factory owner. Now that man is the richest person in town. Elijah's heart froze. Who was the factory owner? Thompson looked into Elijah's eyes. Robert Hayes, Clayton Hayes' father. The world spun around Elijah. Sheriff Hayes' father. He profited from the Morrison family's disappearance. And young Clayton Hayes had led the investigation. Mr. Thompson, do you believe it was murder? The old man shook his head. More than believe it, I know it. But there's nothing to prove it. Back then, who would stand up for a black family? No one questioned it. No one investigated. Elijah picked up the badge. This badge belonged to Deputy J. Morrison. Was he related to James Morrison? Thompson narrowed his eyes. James had a brother, John Morrison. He was a deputy too. But after James disappeared, he vanished as well. They say he resigned and left town. But I never believed it. John loved James very much. He wouldn't abandon him. A terrible suspicion arose in Elijah's mind. What if John Morrison had also been killed? What if the badge was the last trace he left behind? Thompson touched Elijah's shoulder. Son, be careful. The Hayes family is very powerful in this town. If you try to do anything against them, the consequences could be severe. Elijah looked at him with determination. Mr. Thompson, I've been in war. I'm not afraid of death, but I am afraid of not speaking up against injustice. As he returned to his cabin, Elijah's mind was in turmoil. Shadow sat quietly beside him. The dog seemed to sense Elijah's mood. After preparing dinner, Elijah sat by the fireplace. The badge was in his hand. JM, I died for the truth. This inscription was a message from John Morrison. But where did the message point? Shadow suddenly stood up. His ears perked up. He had heard something. Elijah also became alert. Outside, they heard the sound of a car engine. Then the doorbell rang. Elijah tucked his gun into his belt. When he opened the door, Sheriff Hayes was standing there. He wasn't alone. There were 2 other officers. Brooks, Hayes said, his voice threatening. We need to talk. I didn't invite you in, Elijah said, calm but tense. This is an official visit, Hayes said. You're asking questions around town. You're disturbing the elderly. This is unacceptable. Is asking questions a crime? Hayes approached Elijah. Digging up the past can be a crime, especially if you try to reopen closed cases. I'm warning you. The Morrison family matter is closed. 40 years ago. Let it go. Elijah narrowed his eyes at Hayes. What if I don't? Hayes said with a cold smile. Then it would be hard to live here. There are a lot of accidents in Montana, especially in winter. Shadow growled at Hayes. The dog sensed danger. Hayes looked at Shadow. Keep your dog under control, otherwise I'll complain to animal control. Elijah patted Shadow's head. Calm down, boy. Then he turned to Hayes. Sheriff, are you threatening me? No, said Hayes, a glint in his eyes. Just friendly advice. Good evening, Brooks. Hayes and his deputies turned and left. Elijah closed the door. His heart was racing, but he wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he was even more determined. Shadow came to Elijah's side. The dog rested his head on Elijah's knee. Elijah looked at Shadow. You showed me this badge, and we're not going to drop this case. Right, buddy? Shadow wagged his tail. The determination in his eyes matched Elijah's. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He was forming a plan in his head. Hayes had tried to scare him, but Elijah had fought fiercer enemies. This was just the beginning. Early in the morning, the Montana forest was still dark. Elijah hadn't slept. He had sat and thought. Hayes's threat hadn't intimidated him. On the contrary, it had made him more determined. If the sheriff was coming to threaten him so quickly, it meant he had something to hide. And Shadow had shown Elijah that the truth was still out there, buried, but waiting to be found. Elijah looked at Shadow. The dog was sleeping in front of the fireplace, but his ears were alert. Like veterans, military dogs never fully sleep. Always half awake, always ready. Shadow, Elijah said quietly. The dog immediately lifted his head. You showed me that badge. But there's more to this story, isn't there? What else is there? Shadow stood up, stretched, and walked to the door. Elijah understood what the dog wanted. He wanted to go outside. But this time, not just for a walk. Shadow had a destination. Elijah put on his coat, grabbed the flashlight, and followed Shadow out. The air was freezing. His breath came out in clouds. Shadow started walking toward the place where he had found the badge yesterday. But this time he veered off in a different direction. Where are you going, boy? Elijah asked. But Shadow didn't stop, marching on with determined steps. A few minutes later, Shadow stopped at the base of a pine tree. He began digging at the ground again with his claws. Elijah shone the lantern on him. This time the soil was softer. After digging for a few minutes, Shadow pulled something out. A plastic bag. There was something inside. Elijah took the bag. He wiped his hands and slowly opened it. Inside was an old yellowed photograph. In the photo, two men were smiling. Both were black. One was wearing a deputy sheriff's uniform. The other was in civilian clothes. On the back of the photo was an inscription, James and John Morrison, brothers forever. 1985, Elijah's heart raced. James Morrison, the missing man. John Morrison, the deputy. Here was the proof. They were brothers, and this photo was something someone had deliberately hidden here. But who? And why? Shadow looked at Elijah. The dog seemed to say there's more. Elijah looked around. Something had happened here once. Maybe a fight. Maybe a secret had been buried. Shadow, is there anything else here? Shadow lifted his nose. He sniffed the air. Then a few meters away, he stopped next to an old log. He dug lightly with his paws. This time, a metal box emerged. It was rusty but still sturdy. Elijah opened the box. Inside was a diary, old pages filled with handwriting. Elijah opened the first page. There was a date at the top, June 15th, 1987. Elijah began to read. I spoke with James today. He told me about his concerns regarding the land issue. Robert Hayes was pressuring him. Either you sell or you lose, he said. James is scared. I'm scared too. But James is right. That land is ours. Years ago, when our grandfathers came here, they took this land with their blood. Now that the white people know about the metal underneath, they want to take it from us. I went to the sheriff. I talked to Clayton Hayes, but he wouldn't listen to me. Your brother is exaggerating, he said. No one wants to hurt him. But I saw something in Clayton's eyes. A doubt, a fear. It was as if he knew something too, but wasn't saying anything. James wants to keep his family safe. Maybe we should leave town. But James doesn't want to give up his rights. John, he said to me, if we run now, others will be crushed. Someone has to stand up. Elijah turned the page. The next entry, June 20th, 1987. James and his family are gone. Last night I went to their house. The door was open. No one was inside. But there was food on the table, as if they had suddenly gotten up and left. But that's impossible. James would have told me something. He would have called me Clayton, and his father Robert came to the office today. They told me, James probably left voluntarily. He went somewhere else with his family. But I know that's a lie. James wouldn't abandon me. I started an investigation, but at every turn there's an obstacle. Documents are missing. Witnesses can't remember anything. Clayton told me. John dropped this case. It could hurt you. Elijah's hands were shaking. This was a conspiracy, and John Morrison knew it. The next page, June 25th, 1987. Today I went to Robert Hayes's property. Secretly. There I saw a freshly dug spot. I dug into the soil. Deep down there was something. A piece of fabric from James's shirt. I know because I gave him that shirt as a gift. Then I understood. James and his family were murdered and buried here on their own land, but I have no proof, just a piece of fabric. That's not enough. If I go to the sheriff's office, they won't listen to me. Maybe they'll kill me too. I'll spend the night here. Tomorrow I'll make a plan. Maybe I can contact the FBI or go to the press, but I have to do something. James was my brother, and I will see that he gets justice. Elijah turned the last page. June 26, 1987. But this page was incomplete. The handwriting was messy. It looked like it had been written in a hurry. Someone's coming. I hear cars. Clayton and the others. They know they found me. I'm hiding the badge and this diary. If I die, maybe someone will find them. Maybe someone will uncover the truth. James, my brother, I'm proud of you, and I will never forget you. The diary ended there. Elijah closed his eyes. John Morrison had been killed that night. He knew that. And the badge and the diary were his last possessions. Shadow rested his head on Elijah's knee. The dog was sad. It was as if he could feel the pain of the past. You wanted me to find this diary, didn't you, son? Elijah said, stroking Shadow's head. But how did you know? Shadow didn't answer. But Elijah knew. Some things were inexplicable. Perhaps Shadow's former owner had lived here. Perhaps he too had a connection to the Morrison family. Or maybe Shadow had simply been sent to lead the right person to the right place. Elijah carefully stored the diary and the photograph. These pieces of evidence were valuable, but they were also dangerous. If Hayes found out about them, Elijah could be in trouble. When he returned to town, Elijah went to the post office first. He made photocopies of the diary and the photo. He put the originals in his rental safe deposit box at the bank. He sent the copies to different places. One to a lawyer in another city in Montana, another to the local FBI office, the third to an old war buddy he trusted. If anything happened to him, these documents would be safe. That afternoon, Elijah went to the old mine outside town. It belonged to Robert Hayes. It was no longer operational, but for years it had made the Hayes family wealthy. Elijah walked around the mine. The old buildings were in ruins, but in one spot he saw fresh tire tracks. Someone had been here recently. Shadow stopped next to a building. He began to growl. Elijah approached cautiously. The door to the building was locked, but he looked inside through a window. It was dark, but when he shone his flashlight inside, he saw something. On the wall was an old map. There were markings on it, and in one place there was a red X mark below it in handwriting, Morrison Cemetery, 1987. Elijah's blood ran cold. This was it, the place where the Morrison family was buried. But now it was impossible to get in. The door was locked and there could be cameras around, but he knew now. The truth was here, under the ground, and somehow he had to bring it out. When evening came, Elijah returned to the cabin. But something was wrong. Shadow didn't get out of the car right away. The dog growled at the cabin. Elijah took out his gun. He approached the cabin slowly. The door was ajar. There was a noise inside. Someone was in there. Elijah opened the door and went inside. In the living room, Sheriff Clayton Hayes was waiting. In his hand, he held Elijah's photos and notes. "Brooks," Hayes said, cold anger in his voice. "What did I tell you? I told you not to stir up the past." "You entered here without permission," Elijah said, pointing his gun at Hayes. "This is trespassing." Hayes laughed. "Trespassing? I'm the sheriff. I'm investigating a suspicious situation here. You're trying to reopen a closed case. You're misleading local authorities, and now you're threatening me with a gun. I think it's time I arrested you." Elijah didn't lower his gun. "I know what you did to the Morrison family. Your father killed them to take the land, and you closed the investigation. John Morrison tried to stop you, but you killed him too." Hayes's face tightened. "Do you have any proof? Because a diary and an old photo won't hold up in court. It's a 40-year-old case. All the witnesses are dead or have forgotten. No one will listen to you." "The FBI will listen," Elijah said. Hayes narrowed his eyes. Did you go to the FBI? Not yet. But if anything happens to me, they'll automatically get it. Copies of the diary are in safe hands. If I die, everything will come out. Hayes gritted his teeth. You think you're very clever. But you forget that I'm the law here. My word is law, not yours. The law applies to everyone, Elijah said. Including sheriffs. Hayes stood up. Brooks, I'm telling you one last time, drop this. Or not only you, but everyone around you will suffer. Old Thompson, for example. Or Mrs. Martha. Accidents happen. Especially to old people. Elijah's anger flared, but he remained calm. Get out of my house now. Hayes walked to the door. But as he turned, he said one last thing. Be careful, Brooks. The Montana woods are dangerous. People get lost, and no one finds them. He slammed the door behind him. Elijah took a breath. His hands were shaking. Shadow came over and rested his head on his lap. Are you okay, buddy? Elijah asked. Shadow responded silently. He was fine, but he was worried. Elijah watched Hayes's car drive away from the windowsill. Now things had gotten serious. Hayes hadn't just threatened him. He had clearly warned him. But Elijah wasn't going to back down. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He was forming a plan in his head. Hayes was powerful. Everyone in town was loyal to him. But he had a weakness, pride. Hayes thought he was untouchable, and that would be his downfall. When morning came, Elijah made a decision. He had to go to the FBI. But before he did that, he needed solid proof. The diary and the photo were a start. But the graves were the definitive proof. Elijah called an old comrade in arms. Marcus lived 200 miles away in Montana. He was a retired soldier and had always trusted Elijah. Marcus, Elijah said, I need your help. Tell me, brother. What do you need? A digging job. But it's dangerous. If we get caught, we could be in trouble. Marcus laughed. Elijah, we defused bombs with you in Afghanistan. A digging job is child's play. When? This weekend, midnight. All right. I'll be there. Elijah hung up the phone. He had a plan now. Saturday night, they would go into the old mine. They would dig at the spot marked X on the map. If they found the bodies of the Morrison family, that would be enough to take Hayes to court. But it wouldn't be easy. Hayes was probably watching the mine. There were cameras. Maybe guards. Elijah would have to use his military training. On Friday, Elijah went to town, but this time to shop. He bought a shovel, a flashlight, rope, and a few basic supplies. He tried not to arouse suspicion. At the butcher shop, he ran into Mr. Jenkins. Elijah, how are you, son? Jenkins said warmly. I'm fine, Mr. Jenkins. How are you? Well, we're getting old, but thankfully we're in good health. I hear you've been digging through old files. The Morrison family case. Elijah was careful. I was just curious. I found a badge, did some research. Jenkins lowered his voice. Look, son, I was a young man back then. But I remember. The Morrisons were good people. Their disappearance didn't sit right with anyone. But the sheriff closed the case. They said they left voluntarily. But I never believed it. Why? Because James Morrison said something to me. A week before he disappeared. He said, Mr. Jenkins, if anything happens to me, look after my family. I didn't understand it then. But now I think, maybe he knew something. Elijah listened carefully. Did he say anything else? Jenkins thought. Yes, he said, the truth, even if it's buried underground, will come out eventually. It was a strange thing to say, but now it makes sense. Elijah thanked Jenkins and left. His head was filled with new information. James Morrison knew something, and maybe he had left evidence somewhere. Saturday came. When evening fell, Marcus arrived. With him was another old friend, Tyrone. All three were veterans. All three trusted each other. Are you ready? Elijah asked. We're ready, said Marcus. At midnight, the three of them and Shadow went to the old mine. They moved carefully in the dark. Avoiding the cameras, they reached the spot marked on the map. This is it, said Elijah. We're digging. The three of them started digging with shovels. The ground was frozen, but it had been dug years ago. Half an hour later, one of the shovels hit something hard. Bone. Elijah held the flashlight. In the ground, there was a skeleton. And next to it, three more. The Morrison family. James, Linda, Sarah, and Marcus. They were all here. Buried, forgotten. Elijah closed his eyes. We finally found them. Marcus took a photo. Tyrone recorded the GPS coordinates. This was proof. Definitive, indisputable proof. But at that moment, car headlights appeared in the distance. Someone was coming. Quick, close the grave. Elijah shouted, but it was too late. The car pulled up to the mine. Sheriff Hayes and 4 deputies got out. They had guns in their hands. Hands up. Hayes shouted. You're all under arrest. Elijah, Marcus, and Tyrone raised their hands. Shadow growled, but Elijah told him to stay calm. Hayes looked at the grave. His face turned pale. What have you done? We found the truth, Elijah said. The bodies of the Morrison family. The people you and your father killed. Hayes pointed his gun at Elijah. You can't prove anything. This grave is an illegal excavation. You trespassed on private property. You disturbed old bodies. You'll rot in jail. The FBI is coming, Elijah said. I told them everything. I sent the GPS coordinates. If you do anything to us, it'll be worse. Hayes hesitated. He wasn't sure if Elijah was bluffing. Sheriff, said one of the officers. Maybe we really should call the FBI. This is serious. Hayes glared at the officer. Don't tell me what to do. But at that moment, the sound of a helicopter came from afar. And lights. The FBI was coming. Elijah had really called them. And now they were there. Hayes's face fell into despair. The game was over. The 40-year-old secret had finally come out. The helicopter's rotors pierced the night. A beam of light descended upon the old mine, illuminating everything. The grave, the skeletons, Sheriff Hayes's face, a mix of fear and rage, and Elijah's resolute stance. Shadow stood tall beside Elijah. The dog waited with the calmness of a victorious soldier. Because the truth had finally come out. The first person to descend from the helicopter was Special Agent Sarah Chen. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, a woman who carried authority with every step. 3 more agents descended behind her. All wore FBI badges on their chests. Federal investigation. Chen called out. Everyone stay where you are. Hands where we can see them. Sheriff Hayes's deputies looked at each other in shock. Hayes himself was frozen. He knew he had lost the game. Agent Chen approached Elijah. Are you Elijah Brooks? Yes, ma'am, Elijah said. The documents you sent us contained serious allegations. John Morrison's diary, the photos, and the GPS coordinates. These coordinates? Yes. This is where the Morrison family is buried. Chen looked at the grave. He shone his flashlight on it. The bones of 4 skeletons grinned up from the earth. His face hardened. Criminal investigation team, come here. Document everything, he ordered. Then he turned to Hayes. Sheriff Hayes, you need to come with us. For questioning. I'm the sheriff. Hayes shouted. What are you doing in my jurisdiction? I have authority here. Your authority is invalid in the face of a federal investigation, Chen said coldly. And Mr. Brooks claims you made illegal threats and intimidation against him. That's a federal crime. Hayes shot Elijah an angry look. You ruined everything. No, Elijah said, a bitter triumph in his voice. You ruined everything 40 years ago. When you killed the Morrison family. When you silenced John Morrison. I just brought it to light. The FBI team got to work immediately. The grave was carefully opened. Forensic experts examined the bones. They took DNA samples. Everything was photographed and recorded. Elijah, Marcus, and Tyrone gave statements as witnesses. The diary, badge, and photos were handed over as evidence. As dawn broke, Sheriff Clayton Hayes was handcuffed. He was put in his car in front of his deputies. His face bore the deep marks of defeat. For 40 years, he had lived like the king of the town. Now he was just a criminal. Elijah Brooks, Agent Chen said when he came to him one last time. What you did was dangerous. But it was brave. The Morrison family will finally get justice. Thanks to you. I just followed the path Shadow showed me, said Elijah, stroking the dog's head. Without him, we wouldn't have found anything. Chen looked at Shadow. The dog watched him intently. An impressive animal. It's as if he understands everything. He does, Elijah said. Veteran dogs see more than we do. Because they see with their hearts. We see with our eyes, Chen smiled. You're philosophizing, but you're right. Sometimes, to see the truth, you need a different perspective. The FBI team left the mine at dawn. Elijah, Marcus, and Tyrone returned to the cabin. They felt tired but relieved. It had been a long night. But in the end, justice had prevailed. The next day, the town was shaken by the news. Everyone heard it. Sheriff Clayton Hayes had been arrested in connection with the Morrison family murders. The 40-year-old secret had exploded. People couldn't believe it. Hayes was their hero. Trustworthy, honest, fair, or so they thought. Mr. Thompson sat at home watching the news on TV. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Finally," he whispered. "Finally, the truth has come out." Mrs. Martha reread old newspapers in the library. News of the Morrison family's disappearance. Back then, no one had taken it seriously. Now everyone saw the terrible truth. Jenkins was talking to customers in his butcher shop. "I always knew," he said, "but I had no proof." Elijah Brooks did an incredible job. That young man is a real hero. But not everyone was happy. Hayes' supporters were still skeptical. Maybe Brooks made it all up, they said. Maybe the bodies belonged to someone else. But the FBI left no room for doubt. DNA tests confirmed that the bodies belonged to the Morrison family. The cause of death was gunshot wounds. Bullet fragments were found in the bones, and those bullets matched standard police weapons from the 1980s. John Morrison's diary told the whole story. James Morrison's land dispute, Robert Hayes' threats, Clayton Hayes closing the investigation, and John's final entry predicted his own death. 2 weeks later, Elijah testified as a witness in federal court. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, townspeople, those seeking justice. Everyone wanted to witness this historic moment. Elijah sat on the witness stand. The prosecutor asked him questions. He explained how he found the badge, how he discovered the diary, how he uncovered the grave. Every word was listened to carefully. Hayes' lawyer tried to trip Elijah up. "Mr. Brooks, you're a veteran. You have PTSD. Could you be imagining these events?" Elijah remained calm. "No, the diary is real. The badge is real. The bodies are real. These are not fantasies. These are truths that have been buried for 40 years, the lawyer continued. But you may be biased against Sheriff Hayes. He treated you coldly. Maybe you wanted revenge? Not revenge, Elijah said, his voice deep with sorrow. Justice. The Morrison family was murdered. Just for the land. John Morrison was silenced because he tried to uncover the truth. That's unacceptable. And I did everything I could to fix it. In the courtroom, applause rose. The judge banged his gavel. Silence. But Elijah's words had touched everyone's heart. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a fight against systematic racism, corruption, and injustice. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses were heard one by one. Mr. Thompson recounted James Morrison's land dispute. Jenkins remembered the Morrison family's final days. FBI experts presented DNA tests and ballistics reports. And most importantly, John Morrison's diary was read aloud. Everyone in the courtroom listened in silence. John's words were finally being heard 40 years later. James, my brother, I am proud of you, and I will never forget you. When this last sentence was read, sobs were heard in the courtroom. This was not just a document. This was a brother's love. It was one man's courage to die for what was right. Clayton Hayes refused to take the witness stand. His lawyer did not exercise his right to defend him, because there was nothing to defend. The evidence was overwhelming, but the FBI dug deeper. Robert Hayes, Clayton's father, had died 15 years earlier, but he too had crimes. The investigation examined Robert's business records. A week after the Morrison family disappeared, Robert had officially purchased that land. Almost for free, because the owners were missing. That land had earned the Hayes family millions of dollars over the next 30 years. The copper and silver mine was a fortune, and every penny was blood money. The jury's verdict was announced on November 6th. The courtroom was packed again. Elijah sat in the back row. Shadow, acting as a service dog, was by his side. The two waited silently. The jury foreman stood up. In the case of the Morrison family murders, our verdict for the defendant Clayton Hayes. Guilty of first-degree murder. On 4 separate counts, the courtroom erupted in applause. Elijah closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. It was finally over. The Morrison family had found justice. The judge banged his gavel. Clayton Hayes, you are sentenced to life imprisonment for each murder. You are not eligible for parole. You will remain in prison for the rest of your life. As Hayes was handcuffed and led out of the courtroom, he looked at Elijah. There was hatred in his eyes, but also defeat. Elijah didn't even look at him, because Hayes was now in the past. What mattered was the future. After the trial, Elijah returned to town, but now he was seen as a hero. People waved at him, thanked him. You brought justice to the Morrison family, they said. You are a true hero. But Elijah was uncomfortable. He didn't want to be a hero. He had only done what was right. He had followed the path Shadow had shown him. It was that simple. One day there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he saw a young woman. She was in her 30s, elegant, with intelligent eyes. "Mr. Brooks?" said the woman. "My name is Dr. Michelle Morrison. I'm James Morrison's granddaughter." Elijah was surprised. Granddaughter? Yes, James's son Marcus was 8 when he disappeared. But before his family was killed, Marcus had been staying with his aunt for a while, in another state. So he wasn't home that night. He was the only one who survived. He grew up, got married, and I'm his daughter. Elijah invited the woman in. Michelle sat down and explained, "My father never found out what happened to his family. For years they were said to be missing. But he always knew. He knew they were dead. His heart felt it. 10 years ago my father died of cancer. His last words were, 'One day the truth will come out.' And here you are bringing it out." Michelle couldn't hold back her tears. "You brought us closure. My grandfather, grandmother, aunt, and uncles. Finally, they can rest in peace, thanks to you." Elijah felt a lump in his throat. Shadow showed me. Without him, I would never have found them." Michelle looked at Shadow. The dog watched her with calm eyes. "He's a special animal. Like an angel." "Maybe so," Elijah said, smiling. "Maybe Shadow was sent by John Morrison's spirit to guide me to find the truth." Michelle handed Elijah an envelope. "This is something my father specified in his will. If the truth about his family comes to light, it's to be given to the person who finds it." Elijah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. The check was for $100,000. "No," Elijah said, trying to return the envelope. "I can't accept this. I didn't do it for the money." "I know," Michelle said. "But my father wanted this. Justice isn't free. You risked your life. You faced threats. This is my father's thanks. Please accept it." Elijah took a deep breath. Then he nodded. "All right, but I'll use this money for a purpose. For veterans and their dogs. Because they saved my life. Shadow led me to the truth. Now I must save others," Michelle smiled. "My father would be so happy to hear that." 3 months later, a formal funeral was held for the Morrison family. The town of Whitefish gathered. Everyone was there. 4 coffins were lined up side by side. James, Linda, Sarah, and Marcus Morrison. Finally, they were laid to rest together. The priest spoke. "This family fell victim to injustice. But today, justice has prevailed. Thanks to Elijah Brooks and Shadow, the Morrison family has found peace. Their story teaches us that the truth can never remain buried. Sooner or later it comes to light." Elijah attended the funeral. Shadow was by his side. The dog walked toward the coffins. He bowed his head. It was as if he was paying his respects. Seeing this, people couldn't hold back their tears. After the funeral, a monument was erected for John Morrison. It read, "Deputy John Morrison died for the truth." The badge was displayed on the monument. Inside a glass case, it would be preserved forever. Elijah stood in front of the monument. "John," he said quietly, "your mission is complete. Your brother found justice. Rest in peace." The wind blew softly. It was as if a spirit was giving thanks. The FBI expanded its investigation. It turned out that Clayton Hayes was not only guilty of Morrison's murder. Over the years, there had been other suspicious incidents in the town. Missing people, unsolved cases. And in each one, Hayes's fingerprints were found. Agent Chen called Elijah. "Brooks, this investigation you started has created a domino effect. 12 separate cases have been reopened. It appears Hayes was a serial offender, especially against people of minority backgrounds." Elijah sighed. "So the Morrisons weren't the only ones." "No, but they were the most tragic. Because they were killed just for the land. Greed sometimes breeds the darkest murders. Will the other families find justice? We're working on it. But some cases are very old. Evidence is lost. Witnesses are dead. But we'll do everything we can. Thanks to you, there is hope now." Elijah hung up the phone. He knew that what he was doing was only the beginning. In Montana, and perhaps across the entire country, there were hundreds of Morrison families. Forgotten, ignored, buried truths. But Shadow and Elijah had given them hope. If a man and a dog could uncover a 40-year-old secret, so could others. Winter was slowly ending. The snow began to melt. The forest turned green. Life returned to Montana. Elijah sat in his cabin, looking out at the view with Shadow. "You know, my friend," Elijah said, stroking Shadow's head, You didn't just show me a badge. You showed me my purpose. When I came back from the war, I was lost. I didn't know where I belonged. But you showed me. Fighting for justice is still a purpose. War isn't just on the battlefield. Sometimes it's in your own country. Shadow looked at Elijah. There was deep understanding in his eyes. The two sat in silence. The veteran and his dog. Two warriors now at peace. But Elijah knew this wasn't the end. There were more secrets. More justice to be sought. And Shadow would lead him to the right place again. Because dogs never forget. And the truth never stays buried. Spring brought life to Montana. The snow melted, flowers bloomed, and Elijah Brooks felt true peace for the first time in years. Sitting on the porch of his cabin, he watched the sunrise with Shadow. The dog was starting to show his age. He was now 8 years old. His gray fur was spreading over his head, but the sharpness in his eyes was still the same. Shadow was still a warrior. He was still a protector. "I know, my friend," Elijah said, stroking Shadow's head. "You want to rest. But I don't think our work is done yet." Shadow pricked up his ears. It was as if he understood Elijah's words, and perhaps he did. Because that morning Elijah's phone rang. It was Agent Sarah Chen. "Brooks, hello. I'm sorry to bother you, but we need your help. Tell me." After the Morrison case, 12 different families contacted us. All of them mentioned loved ones who disappeared in the 1980s and 90s. All of them are from minority backgrounds, and all of them lived in or around Whitefish County. We're reopening these cases, but for some of them we need leads. You and Shadow did an incredible job on the Morrison case. Maybe you could help with the others too. Elijah was silent. This was a huge responsibility, but it was also a duty. If he could do it, he had to. "What do you want me to do?" "First, I want you to meet a family. The Rodriguez family." In 1992, the father, Carlos Rodriguez, disappeared. He was a construction worker in town. One day, he went to work and never came back. The police said he probably left voluntarily, but his family never believed that. And now? Now his wife, Maria Rodriguez, is 65 years old. She's still alive, and she still wants to know what happened to her husband. Maybe you can talk to her. Maybe Shadow can find something. Elijah looked out the window. The forest glistened in the sun. "Okay, I'll come." Maria Rodriguez lived in a small house on the edge of Whitefish. When Elijah and Shadow arrived at her door, the elderly woman greeted them with a warm smile. But in her eyes there was deep sadness, a weight she had carried for 33 years. "Mr. Brooks, I know you," said Maria with a Spanish accent. "I saw you on TV. You brought justice to the Morrison family. God bless you." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. But I just did what was right." Maria invited them inside. The house was modest but clean. Old family photos hung on the walls. One caught Elijah's attention. A young man smiling through sunglasses. Next to him were two small children. "Carlos," said Maria, looking at the photo. "My husband, and our children, Miguel and Rosa. They're both grown now. Miguel's a teacher, Rosa's a nurse, but neither of them ever got to know their father. Carlos disappeared when Miguel was 5. Rosa was only 3. Elijah felt a pang of pain. "Can you tell me about that day? The day Carlos disappeared?" Maria sat down and took a deep breath. March 15, 1992. It was a Saturday. Carlos was working on a construction site. They were building a new hotel outside of town. That morning he left as usual. "I'll be back tonight, mi amor," he said. And he left. But he didn't come back that night. He didn't come back the next morning either. I waited 2 days, then I went to the police. What did they say? They said, maybe he ran off with another woman. They said, maybe he had debts, he went back to Mexico. But I knew. Carlos would never leave us. He was a family man. And he didn't have the money to go back to Mexico. Did the police investigate? Maria's face darkened. They did. But they didn't take it seriously. 2 weeks later, the case was closed. No evidence, they said. And I waited. For 33 years. Every day, I waited for the doorbell to ring. Maybe Carlos would come back. But he never did. Elijah took notes in his notebook. Who was Carlos's boss, the construction company? Hayes Construction, Robert Hayes's company. Elijah's heart raced. Hayes, the same name again. Robert Hayes? The same guy from the Morrison case? Yes. Back then he was the biggest employer in town. Everyone worked for him because there was no other option. Did Carlos have a problem with Robert Hayes? Maria paused. I don't know. But a week before he disappeared, Carlos was coming home tense. Something was bothering him. I asked, but he said, work stress. He didn't say more. Elijah looked at Shadow. The dog was listening intently. Mrs. Rodriguez, is the construction site where Carlos worked still there? Yes. It's a hotel now, the Mountain View Inn. It's still operating. Elijah stood up. We need to go there. Maybe Shadow can find something. Maria looked at him hopefully. Really? After 33 years, can anything still be found? The truth never disappears, Elijah said. It just hides. But it waits to be found. The Mountain View Inn was a large, impressive hotel. It was outside the town at the foot of the mountains. Elijah and Shadow went to the hotel. There was a young clerk at the reception desk. Hello, how can I help you? When was this hotel built? Elijah asked. In 1992. Why do you ask? Just curious. Thank you. Elijah wandered around the hotel. Shadow lifted his nose in the air. He sniffed the air. Then he walked to the back of the hotel, toward an old basement. The door was locked, but Shadow tried to scratch it insistently. What did you find, boy? Elijah asked. Shadow growled. The dog sensed something. Elijah looked around. No one was there. He forced the lock. The door opened. They went inside. The basement was dark and damp. Old construction materials lay in the corners. Elijah turned on his flashlight. Shadow went to the far end of the basement. He stopped under a piece of concrete and began digging. Elijah approached. Is it here? Shadow answered decisively. Elijah dug around the concrete with his shovel. The concrete was freshly poured, meaning it had been added later. Elijah broke off a piece of concrete. Underneath was soil, and buried in the soil was something Elijah dug. A few minutes later, a skeleton emerged, and in the jacket pocket there was an old ID card. Carlos Rodriguez, construction worker. Elijah closed his eyes. We found it. The FBI arrived at the scene immediately. The basement was sealed off. A team was sent to remove the body. DNA testing confirmed it was Carlos Rodriguez. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. He had been struck on the head. Agent Chen called Elijah. Brooks, you did something incredible. Carlos Rodriguez had been here for 33 years. He was killed during the hotel's construction and buried under the concrete. Who killed him? We're still investigating. But we know Robert Hayes owned that construction site, and some of the workers who were there at the time are now giving statements. They say Carlos complained about safety violations. He wasn't following building codes. But Robert Hayes wanted to keep costs down. When Carlos said he was going to report it, he was threatened. And then he was killed, yes, and buried. So no one would know. And the hotel would open. They would make a profit. Elijah swallowed his anger. How many people did Robert Hayes kill? We don't know. But the number is growing every day. Carlos Rodriguez is at least the 6th victim. And there could be more. Robert Hayes is dead. But Clayton Hayes is still alive. Did he know about this? He knew. Clayton received Carlos's missing person report. And he did nothing. Because his father ordered it. He's an accomplice too. What will his punishment be? He's already serving life. For the Morrison family. But now he'll also be charged for the murder of Carlos Rodriguez. And for the other cases. He'll never get out of prison. Elijah hung up the phone. Seeking justice brought relief. But also deep sorrow. How many families, how many years had they waited? How many people had died without learning the truth about their loved ones? Maria Rodriguez, upon receiving Carlos's body, thanked him through her tears. 33 years, she said. I waited 33 years. And finally I know. My husband didn't abandon me. He was murdered. But at least now I can give him a proper funeral. Lay him to rest in peace. The funeral for Carlos Rodriguez was crowded. The entire Latin community of the town came. Elijah and Shadow were there too. The priest spoke. Carlos Rodriguez was an honest man. He loved his family. He wanted to do the right thing. And for that he was murdered. But today he has found justice. The Hayes family's tyranny has ended. Rest in peace, Carlos. Miguel and Rosa, Carlos's children, hugged Elijah. You found our father, they said. We never knew him. But now we can say goodbye. Thank you so much. Elijah felt a lump in his throat. I just followed the path Shadow showed me. Without him, we would never have found him. Rosa stroked Shadow's head. He's an angel, sent by God. Shadow looked at Rosa. The dog had a calm but deep expression, as if to say, I just did my job. In the months that followed, Elijah and Shadow solved 7 more cases. Each one was a similar story. People from minority backgrounds had stood up to Robert Hayes. They had sought justice, and they had been killed for it. Their bodies had been buried in different places. But Shadow found them all. For each one, Elijah followed the same process. He informed the FBI an excavation was conducted. The bodies were found. The families found closure. And Clayton Hayes received additional punishment for each new murder. But this work wore Elijah down. Not physically, but emotionally. Beneath each body, there was a story. There was a family. There was pain. And Elijah felt it all. One night he sat in his cabin. Shadow was beside him. Elijah looked at the dog. Buddy, we do this job. But sometimes it gets too heavy. Every day another murder. Another pain. When does it end? Shadow rested his head on Elijah's knee. The dog looked at him. In his eyes there was a deep understanding. It was as if he were saying, it won't end. But you can't rest. Because you are the hope, Elijah hugged Shadow. You're right. We'll keep going, because who else will? 6 months later, Elijah made a decision. The $100,000 he received from Michelle Morrison now had to serve a purpose. Elijah decided to open a center, the Brooks Shadow Justice and Healing Center. The center had 2 purposes: therapy for veterans, especially soldiers suffering from PTSD, a therapy program with dogs. Because Elijah knew how Shadow had healed him, other veterans could heal the same way. Research into missing persons cases, especially for minority families. Unsolved murders, missing people. Shadow and other trained dogs could help find evidence. The center was set up in an old farmhouse outside of town. Elijah gathered volunteers, former soldiers, dog trainers, therapists. They all believed in the same goal, healing and justice. The opening day was a crowded ceremony. Michelle Morrison was there. Maria Rodriguez was there, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Martha Jenkins. All the town's supporters had come. Elijah gave a speech. This center isn't for one man. This center is for all of us. Veterans, those seeking justice, those who have lost loved ones. We all need each other. Shadow taught me that healing isn't found in solitude, but in connection. And justice is not found in silence, but in action. This center will offer both. Come join us, applause rose to the sky. Shadow stood beside Elijah. The dog had become a symbol of hope, justice, and healing. In its first month, the center took in 35 veterans. Each was paired with a dog. The dogs had been rescued from shelters, abandoned, abused animals, but now they too had found a purpose: to heal. One of the veterans was a young man named James. He had returned from Iraq. He had severe PTSD. He couldn't sleep at night. He was afraid of noises. Elijah paired him with a Labrador named Bella. Bella was a calm, patient dog. The first week, James resisted. How is a dog going to heal me? He asked. I don't know, Elijah said honestly, but try it. Shadow healed me. Maybe Bella will heal you? James wasn't convinced, but he agreed to try. Every day he went for walks with Bella. At first he was silent, but Bella was there beside him. She wagged her tail. She wanted to play. Slowly James opened up. One night James had a nightmare. Bomb sounds, screams. He woke up in a sweat, but this time he wasn't alone. Bella was by his bed. The dog licked James's face. She stood by him, calming him. James hugged Bella and cried. For the first time in years, he truly cried, and after crying, he felt relieved. A month later, James came to Elijah. Thank you. Bella is saving me. Every day. I don't know what I'd do without her. Elijah smiled. Thank Bella, she's your hero. The center also worked on missing persons cases. Elijah collaborated with the FBI. Shadow and the other dogs were trained as search and rescue dogs. Old missing persons cases were reopened. One case particularly caught Elijah's attention. Emily Carter. She had gone missing in 1995 at the age of 16. She was a white girl, but she came from a poor family. The police hadn't taken it seriously. She probably ran away from home, they had said. But her family didn't believe that. Now Emily's mother, Barbara, was 68 years old. She was still searching for her daughter. She came to the center and asked Elijah for help. "Please," Barbara said, tears in her eyes, "find my daughter. For 30 years I don't know where she is, dead or alive. I just want to know." Elijah looked at Barbara. "We'll do what we can. Shadow and our team will investigate." Elijah examined the old police reports. The last place Emily was seen was a gas station outside of town. After that, there was no trace. But there was a witness. A man who worked at the gas station had seen Emily next to a car, but he didn't recognize the car. Elijah went to that gas station. Now it was closed. It was just a ruined building. But Shadow found a trace there. The dog went behind the building, to an old well. The well had long since been sealed. But Shadow insisted on digging. Elijah called the FBI. The well was opened. Inside was a skeleton, and next to the body was Emily's ID. When Barbara heard the news, she collapsed. But at the same time, she was relieved. "Finally, I know," she said. "My daughter didn't suffer. It was quick, and now I can give her a proper funeral." Emily Carter's killer was never found, because the evidence was too old. But at least Emily had come home. Her family had closure. Years passed. The center grew. Now over 200 veterans were receiving therapy with dogs. 43 missing cases had been solved, and Shadow had become a legend. Newspapers called him the Dog of Truth. Documentaries were made. Books were written. But Elijah never exposed Shadow to the pressures of fame. Shadow was still the same loyal, humble dog. He was just getting old. By the time he was 11, Shadow's energy was waning. He tired easily now. The vet said it was natural aging. But Elijah knew. Shadow's time was approaching. One winter night, Shadow fell ill. He was struggling to breathe. Elijah took him to the vet. The doctor delivered the bad news. Heart failure. Advanced. Treatment would be futile. "How much time does he have?" Elijah asked, his voice trembling. "Maybe a week. Maybe less. To prevent suffering, you might consider euthanasia." Elijah looked at Shadow. The dog was tired, but there was still that old light in his eyes. "No," Elijah said. "Shadow will choose his own time. I won't force him." That week, Elijah didn't leave Shadow's side. The two stayed in the cabin. Elijah told Shadow about the things they had done together. How they found the badge. How they saved the Morrison family. How many lives they saved. "You are my hero," Elijah said, stroking Shadow's head. "You gave me a reason to live. You showed me my purpose, and you brought justice to countless people. Rest in peace, my friend. You've done your duty." Shadow looked at Elijah. The dog seemed to say thank you. He wagged his tail. Once for the last time. That night, Shadow slept, and he never woke up again. He passed away peacefully beside Elijah. Shadow's funeral was held in the central courtyard. Hundreds of people came. Veterans, families, FBI agents, journalists. Everyone paid their respects to Shadow. Elijah gave a speech. Shadow was a dog, but he was more than a dog. He was a teacher. He taught me that the truth never stays buried. He taught me that fighting for justice is never in vain. And he taught me that the deepest connections are made not with words but with actions. Shadow, rest in peace. But your legacy will live on forever. Shadow's grave was placed at the entrance of the headquarters. On the gravestone was a simple inscription: Shadow, Dog of Truth, Guardian of Justice, Most Loyal of Friends. And next to the grave, a statue was erected. Shadow's statue, with a badge. John Morrison's badge. They would be together forever. After Shadow, Elijah continued working at the center. But he was no longer alone. New dogs arrived. Shadow's children, grandchildren, all with the same genes. The same courage. The same loyalty, and each one was used in new cases. In Montana, then across the entire country, the Brooks Shadow model became the standard. Police departments, the FBI, even other countries adopted this system. The dogs were used not only for search and rescue, but also to uphold justice. 10 years later, Elijah was 57. His hair was completely gray, but his spirit was still young and strong. The center was now a camp. Over 500 veterans were receiving therapy here. Over 200 dogs had been trained, and 156 missing cases had been solved. One day there was a knock at the door. A young woman was standing there. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Sarah Morrison. I'm James Morrison's granddaughter." "I think we've met," Elijah remembered. "Michelle's daughter." "Of course, Sarah, welcome. What brings you here?" "I graduated from law school, and I want to work with you. I want to provide legal support for the center. In my grandfather's name. In Shadow's name." Elijah smiled. "You're hired." "Welcome, Sarah." And so a new generation took up the cause. The Morrison family were no longer just victims. They were warriors. Warriors for justice. Elijah's 60th birthday was celebrated at the center. Hundreds of people came. Speeches were made. Thanks were given. And most importantly, a ceremony was held in front of Shadow's statue. Elijah stood before the statue. Shadow's statue. In the dog's eyes, there was still that old light. It was as if it were saying, "Oh, keep going, buddy." "Shadow," Elijah said quietly. "You're gone. But your work continues. Every day a new dog follows your path. Every day a new veteran heals. Every day a new family finds justice. You will never be forgotten, because you weren't just a dog. You were hope. And hope never dies. The sun set. Montana's mountains glowed in the last rays of sunlight. Elijah sat on the center's porch. Beside him was a new dog, Shadow's grandchild. Its name was Hope. Hope looked at Elijah. The dog had the same eyes, the same loyalty. It seemed to say, "I'm ready." "Where are we going?" Elijah smiled. "I don't know, Hope, but wherever we go, we'll go together. Because you and I carry Shadow's legacy, and that legacy never ends." In the town of Whitefish, a monument was erected, the Dogs of Justice Monument. Shadow's statue stood at its center. Around it were the names of the other heroic dogs, and at the top an inscription: "The truth never stays buried, justice never stays silent, and love is never forgotten. To Shadow and his friends with eternal gratitude." Elijah Brooks retired at age 65, but he never left the center. Every week he came as a volunteer. He talked to the veterans. He trained the dogs. And most importantly, he told Shadow's story. Children learned about Shadow in schools. The dog of truth was taught in classes, and each new generation learned the same lesson. Fighting for justice is never in vain. Remaining silent is complicity. And sometimes the greatest heroes can be four-legged. The Morrison family, the Rodriguez family, the Carter family, and the other 153 families finally found peace. Their bodies were properly buried. The killers were punished, and their names were never forgotten. Clayton Hayes died in prison. He was 75 years old, alone, without remorse. But his legacy was only shame. No one in town wanted to mention his name. Robert Hayes's company went bankrupt. The buildings were demolished. The land was expropriated, and in its place a park was built. Justice Park. Children played there. Families had picnics, and in the middle there was a monument, dedicated to the names of all the lost people. Montana changed. The town changed. But most importantly, the people changed. Now racism was less accepted. Minorities were better protected. And justice was accessible to everyone. It all started with a badge, a rusty, forgotten badge. But Shadow found it, and Elijah uncovered the truth. Together they changed the world. A small world, perhaps, but a world nonetheless. The final scene takes place at Elijah's cabin. He is 70 years old, still healthy. Hope is now an old dog. The two are sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Hope," says Elijah, "you are Shadow's granddaughter, and you are as brave as he was, as loyal as he was. But now I am getting old. Maybe one day I'll go too. Like Shadow." Hope looks at Elijah. The dog is sad but understanding. "But don't worry," Elijah continues. "The legacy will continue. The center will continue, and you will be paired with a new person. Maybe another veteran, maybe another seeker of justice, and you will guide them too, like Shadow did." Elijah looks at Shadow's grave. The statue glows in the sunset. "Shadow," he says quietly, "you taught me everything. Now I teach others. The cycle continues, and truth always wins. Thank you, my friend. I love you." The wind blows softly. Leaves rustle. And for a moment Elijah thinks he hears Shadow's growl. As if the dog is saying, "I love you too." Elijah smiles. His eyes fill with tears. But he is happy, because he knows Shadow never left. He is always there. In every new dog, in every new case, in every new hope, truth is never buried, justice is never silent, and love never dies. Shadow will live forever, in hearts and stories and in every soul seeking justice.